It has long been the custom that every border station has its own, specific special problem. Sometimes it is a certain section of the border, which for natural reasons is the most difficult to guard and patrol, and sometimes it is a particularly noteworthy person, an infamous celebrity. The situation in the area of the outpost, which we will call Park here, was already very complicated. On the other side was Manchuria, which meant a full set of all imaginable troubles and all kinds of intruders. Opium carriers walked across the border, in every conceivable guise with a lot of clever tricks. Addiction, wasn't born yesterday, especially in the Far East. Back under the Tsar, drug trafficking from Chinese territory was a big and serious business. So serious that police officers sent from the capital disappeared without a trace, and the police did not go to other districts and cities at all. Only the Soviet police did away with these neighborhoods in the early 1920s, albeit not by the most gentlemanly methods. They were simply cordoned off by special units, set on fire at four ends, and machine-gunned the criminal element fleeing in panic. Inhumane but effective. In general, opium carriers walked across the border. There were also mosquito gangs, groups of several people from the White Cossacks, living on the other side, well armed, able to fight and organize lightning sabotage, and then dissolve in the taiga like sugar in boiling water. On the other side, from the Manchurian authorities and the Japanese, which in fact was the same thing, oppressed Chinese of both sexes and all ages were fleeing to the Soviet Union. Among this public, as it is easy to guess, there were enough spies who existed not only in novels and movies. The Japanese sent agents en masse and skillfully. There was a case when a Chinese guerrilla who had miraculously escaped from a Manchurian prison, where he had had both ears cut off according to the local custom, escaped from that side. The victimized comrade was sheltered and found a job, and only in 1942 he was exposed. It was reliably found out that it was not a Chinese but a Japanese of a good samurai family name. His ears were cut off under anesthesia by a military doctor. He was, of course, shot after the proper legal procedures but was treated with respect. A professional who agrees to have his ears cut off for the sake of a mission should be respected. So the main headache at the outpost Park was a Chinese man with some simple and common name, either Wang or Zhao, and his nickname was Wise Fox. The Chinaman, with a nickname resembling an Indian name, had justified his nickname long ago. The file on him was as thick as a brick, and it was known for sure that he was carrying opium and other contraband, and in addition was tangled up with Japanese intelligence. Contraband and intelligence services were always closely intertwined, but it was impossible to get him. He left like sand through his fingers, each time reminding those hapless trappers that he did not get his nickname in vain. Some of the local population, including NKVD sources, said that the Wise Fox was somehow connected with the evil power, and that this explained his elusiveness and everything else. His supernatural instinct for ambushes, his ability to disappear from the most reliable traps. The curators from the NKVD, as one can easily guess, suppressed these conversations and similar sentiments in order not to breed silly mysticism, which belongs only in the dustbin of history. This is exactly what the man who was the subject of the following story believed, until a certain time. Command makes decisions quickly and unexpectedly. Therefore, for our hero, the next order was a thunderbolt from a clear sky, but only in the sense of surprise. He was an experienced man. He had served not for the first year. 3 allocated to his subordinates, 2 were not green recruits. Special Forces NKVD, were those guys, capable of many difficult operations. The task was simple. There is a Korean who, for some personal reasons, wants to hand over to the Soviet authorities Wise Fox, with whom he served for 2 years, and then for some reason decided to quit. The group must go to the specified point on the border to meet the Korean, and there he will tell them in detail where to catch the Wise Fox. It's an ordinary mission. I've had more difficult and dangerous ones, and the fact that in the corner of the room all the time while the commander was briefing sat a stranger was also a familiar situation. Who knows who and from where? The chief from the region, or even given the importance of the task, a comrade from the People's Commissariat. Such people often loomed in some distance. But given the subsequent events, this stranger was remembered by the storyteller as no one else. A thin face, a skull covered with leather, rather unpleasant. The latter could not serve as a special sign because the chiefs of the system, as a rule, did not shine with charm. On the left sleeve of his overcoat was the emblem of the Soviet Union, but there were no buttonholes on the collar. He sat motionless all the time of the briefing, as if not breathing. Only then, when the commander had finished, he moved closer, took his time to look at the group with a not very pleasant look, and spoke. His voice was remarkable, as if the man, who was not used to being kind and cordial, was sincerely trying to speak with a certain degree of informality and warmth. "Here's the thing, guys," he said, without making eye contact. "If something doesn't work out, if something starts to go wrong, okay, let's not be diplomatic. If something weird, strange, unusual," he definitely made an effort. "In general, if something damnable starts to happen, I allow you to interrupt the mission and go back. Moreover, not even authorize, but demand. Order." And their commander nodded, fully confirming all this. The narrator, the group's senior, forgetting about discipline, stared at the stranger with astonishment. Such, for all the time of service, he had never heard. "Any questions?" He made up his mind and asked as indifferently as he could, "Excuse me, what do you mean, comrade?" The stranger never said his rank. He looked at him with a very unpleasant look and said, as if he had cut him off, "So understand it. What are you, 5 years old? At any incomprehensible devilishness, turn around and go home as fast as you can. The discussion is over. You may go." And they set off into the taiga. 4 red eagles, used to everything in the world, special forces. Soup ration, which had never been seen in ordinary infantry, an excellent compass, pistols, grenades, knives, carbines. They were even given an American Thompson submachine gun with 2 spare discs because of the seriousness of the task. They knew how to walk through the forest, silently and without wandering. And having set out at dawn by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they cautiously approached the hunting hut where, according to instructions, the traitorous Korean was supposed to be waiting. As soon as they saw the hut far ahead, they dispersed, surrounded it from 4 sides, keeping far enough away, and began to observe it. The binoculars were Zeiss binoculars, and they saw at once that at the former porch, leaning his back on the blackened logs, a man in a blue canton was sitting motionless in an uncomfortable posture. And very quickly they saw that the man was dead. The very Korean as he was described. Blue canton, cotton pants, ichigas, gold tooth on the left side. The narrator cursed foully. It was clear that this bastard, the wise fox, had once again justified his nickname. He was ahead of the curve and had taken action. To be sure, they watched the hut and the surrounding area for at least half an hour. If necessary, they could wait for hours. Then, keeping their weapons at the ready, they moved from 4 sides to the corpse. The Korean had a black entrance hole in his forehead, judging by its size, a pistol caliber, and on the back of his head was a corresponding exit wound. The wise fox shot perfectly. They stood and watched. The Korean had time to stiffen, sat there with his eyes serenely open, and on his face, characteristically, a calm smile was blooming. This sometimes happens with corpses. A posthumous grin seems to be a smile. But this time there was a complete impression that the dead man was smiling, and it was unpleasant. We searched, of course, without any squeamishness. They did not find anything interesting, the usual trifles, but of course they collected them in a bag, as it was supposed to be. Then they found a trail nearby that had something strange in it. Actually, it was a very ordinary ichig trail, and there were other similar ones. But the strange thing was that the ground was dry. It hadn't rained in 2 weeks, and the tracks and the area around them were damp. It was unusual, but it still didn't look like devilry, and the narrator, after some thought, gave the order to follow the tracks. They went deeper into the forest, moving with animal sensitivity, keeping their weapons at the ready, listening to the forest sounds. The tracks did not end. The chain stretched out before them, the footprints of a quietly walking man who was not supposed to be like this. After walking 5 or 6 kilometers, they saw the corpse from afar. He was in a sitting position, leaning with his back against a tree. Well, whether anyone believes the narrator or not, it was the same corpse, the same Korean, the same face with a gold tooth on the left side of the upper jaw, the same blue kanten, the same pants, the same ichigas, the same bullet hole in the forehead. There was no mistaking it. They touched the body. Same degree of rigor mortis. Twins? Someone suggested softly. There were no other remarks. Everyone looked at each other, and there was something in those looks that the narrator didn't like very much. Soviet soldiers should not have such looks. Confused, not yet frightened, but full of some unusual anxiety. Maybe this is just the case, said the second. The elder understood perfectly well what the subordinate meant, but he preferred to pretend not to understand. He was young, but not unreasonably considered himself a good soldier. All his previous life, all his upbringing and experience had disgusted him from any mysticism. Despite the strange order, he didn't believe to the end, and he wasn't used to surrendering. He simply ordered, "Go." The beauty of the commander's position is that the orders of a superior in rank or appointed by the head of the group are not supposed not only to be challenged, but even discussed. All 3 of his subordinates were by no means first-timers, special forces. Who knows what they thought about themselves, but they moved on in the same order, without looking back at the new corpse. Strange traces still stretched in a neat chain, and they followed the tracks because there was nothing else to do, and there was nothing around that would fit the concept of devilry. After a few more kilometers, they came to a river. The river was familiar, mapped on all maps, shallow and not wide. The gray water leisurely carried all sorts of garbage. The last trail broke off at the very shore. The narrator became uncomfortable. He could not get rid of the persistent impression that he saw on the water some shaky but stable contours, most of all resembling those very imprints of ichigs, a chain of ghostly footprints, as if by a thread stretching to the other shore through the gray, lazy water. He also looked at his eagles with a sidelong glance and could not escape the impression that they were seeing the same thing. Then something blue floated out from behind the bend. It was a corpse. It lay on the gray water, arms spread, and was being carried as leisurely as garbage, twisting and turning. Basking in a carefree smile, a Korean man in blue Hanton and pants, with a gold tooth on the left side of his upper jaw and a bullet hole in his forehead. It snagged on a snag on the other bank, almost opposite where our 4 heroes were standing, and got stuck. The gray water flowed around him, foaming slightly at the obstacle. Again, no one said anything. But the looks... "Listen, guys," someone began and immediately stopped talking. It seemed that the most ordinary words sounded strange. It seemed that the sky and the sun and the water didn't sound the same. It was creepy. It was only then that the narrator made up his mind. He wasn't roused by fear, but it was becoming clear that he shouldn't be asking for trouble. So he gave the command to go back, and they reached their own without any surprises or mystical surprises. By the way, the second corpse, when they passed the same way, remained in the same place, but they passed it, carefully turning away, pretending as if they saw nothing, as well as the first one, near the hut, which was still sitting against the wall. The unpleasant bald man wrecked their nerves until almost noon tomorrow. He listened to each of them separately, made them put everything down on paper in great detail, and, presumably, compared their testimony. And then, having gathered all together and looking with eyes holes, said as if lazily, "None of this happened, understand? And whoever says a word on the side will be sorry." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just looked like a man capable of wiping 100 of their kind into camp dust, and that was impressive. Then he left. It is not known when and where. And the narrator served himself, never having encountered anything extraordinary in his life, and kept silent about what had happened for a long, long time. By the way, the wise fox was killed 2 months later, under the most ordinary circumstances, without any clever combinations and strains of mind. One of the border guards at dawn spotted a group of 5 people crossing from the other side. Since there was no order to take them alive, the machine gunner simply fired a disc from Diagtarev's machine gun at them. He killed them all. Among the dead were later reliably identified Wise Fox. Whoever he was probably not immune to the bullet. Comment. Actually, a small clarification concerning the time of the action, which can be established quite accurately. The unpleasant bald man has buttonholes on his collar, with longitudinal stripes and stars. Such insignia were introduced by order of the NKVD of the USSR in June 1936 and cancelled in August 1938. The narrator did not see the exact number of asterisks, but 3 stripes by themselves meant a rank at least corresponding to an army colonel. According to the description of the stranger as it became clear later, extremely reminiscent of the well-known Gleb Boki, thickly plastered in all sorts of devilry, occultism, and other mysticism. But you can't ask the narrator about it. He died long before Boki's photos appeared in the books. And then, the description of the mysterious stranger in considerable ranks is hardly applicable to Boki alone. There were plenty of unpleasant subjects with leathery skulls and hole-in-the-wall eyes. I have no comment, that's the story.